If tomorrow starts without me, there's something you should know. While I hold you close, never let you go.
Hello and welcome to The Broken Pack, a podcast focused on giving sibling loss survivors a platform to share their stories and to be heard, something that many sibling loss survivors state that they never have had. Sibling loss is misunderstood. The Broken Pack exists to change that and to support survivors. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Dean. Today, I'm joined by Nina Rodriguez, creator and host of the Grief and Light podcast. After losing her only sibling, Yosef, in 2019, Nina turned her grief into a calling. She's here to share her sibling loss story and why she believes grief work is deeply life-affirming. Take a listen.
'Cause you never know, you just never know.
Content warning: this episode contains talk of substance use, which may be upsetting to some people. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you. I feel like I already know you from interacting and our siblings having died so close together.
I'm so sorry you know this pain, and I'm so grateful that we connected through this work and through our mutual love for these conversations.
Thank you. How would you like to introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So today, and I say today because it looks different with every conversation, but today I would like to introduce myself as a creator and host of Grief and Light, which is a podcast and online support grief platform for grievers. And that was born after the loss of my only sibling, Yosef, in 2019, which obviously it's the reason I'm here. He was my only sibling, and I very much continue to be his sister through this work. This is why I do what I do. And also because I realized that in 2019, when I was going through all of this, there was little to no conversation about sibling loss. And I really felt that needed to change, as I'm sure you resonate with that because of the work that you do naturally. So today I support grievers. My aim is to foster a more grief-informed, hopeful world through conversations about grief and loss. That may sound counterintuitive, but I have found that grief is talking about grief and grief work and addressing grief and shedding a light on it is life-affirming, deeply life-affirming. So I try to contribute my grain of salt through the work that I do today.
Yes, that's beautiful. Your work is really inspiring. And
Likewise.
Thank you. There's so much truth in what you said about how much talking about grief is life-affirming. In August, I was at a grief learning retreat, and it was a beautiful experience. I highly recommend it. But just talking about it, giving that space, and we can't live our lives without acknowledging loss. And so thank you.
A grief retreat sounds wonderful. And also it connects us to what makes life, like the fullness of life, of the full experience. I feel like when we don't talk about it and we avoid it, we don't ever get to the depths of what we could do to feel and experience life truly. And a lot of it is so uncomfortable, incredibly uncomfortable. So I do understand why people avoid it. And also it's very enriching when you do embrace all of it.
Yeah, for sure. To clarify, it was a professional learning retreat. So we were all working in this field. I can tell you more.
Wonderful. And I'm curious, sorry to switch here, but what came out of it? And maybe any ethics that you weren't expecting?
So it's through the Portland Institute of Loss and Transition, which I'm training there.
Oregon or Maine?
Oregon. It's with Dr. Robert Niemeyer and a whole bunch of other well-known grief theorists and people. In that work, of course, you have to, as you know, you explore your own losses as you're trying to work with other people. Otherwise, you can't help other people.
Such an important point.
Yeah. You're not doing the work with them in the session about yourself, but
That self-examination is so important. And that's part of the reason why I started in my own search and grief journey, because I realized very quickly that my experience was not everybody else's experience, internally, externally. And I said, why is this so different? And then I asked about Portland because, fun fact, I used to live there. I lived there for 11 years. Yeah.
Yeah. What did you do professionally before?
So I've always embraced a good pivot. I consider myself a multi-potentialite, and I am not afraid to follow whatever my next season of life calls me to do. So I'm prefacing that because I was in real estate prior to doing grief work. And prior to that, I was in public relations. So very unrelated seemingly, but the thread that ties everything together is a few of them. It's curiosity about the human experience and also ways of supporting people through really big changes in their life. And I would even say prior to that, my first job was in a political think tank in Western Hemisphere affairs. So I've done my fair share of pivots, but grief work has been by far the most aligned, the most intentional, the most that I feel is full of meaning. And the one that feels like a calling more than a job, if you will. It feels like I'm actually here to do this. I'm being called to do this.
Our stories are similar in that way, that I was doing grief work before my brother died, but I'm very intentional about that work. And most of my clients are dealing with loss or grief in some.
You do a beautiful job. Yeah.
Thank you. So how would you like to introduce Joseph to us?
Joseph was my baby brother. Today, what I want to say is he was my first memory as a little tiny human of me being alive. I was 3 years old. I remember him being in my mom's belly. She was about to give birth. And I was telling her how much I wanted to meet him. I was so excited. I remember hugging her belly. And she says, you'll get to meet him soon, but you need to go to sleep because it's already tomorrow. And as a 3-year-old, I was like, what do you mean it's already tomorrow? And it was past midnight is what she meant to say, but I didn't understand the concept of past midnight. So I was so confused. And I just remember that being my first memory as a human on earth, right? And so since I can literally remember, my brother has been a part of my life. And it was and continues to be my privilege to be his sister. It is the role that defined me as a person first. It is the role that I enjoy and love the most. And I'm married and I have family and I have all these other roles that I play, but being his sister was and is truly an honor. And so he unfortunately, before I get to the unfortunately, he was an adorable boy with a big toothy smile. And he loved nature. He loved life. He was very curious, sensitive. He had sensitive as in mature sensitive. He had a very high emotional intelligence for his age. And unfortunately, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, emotional intelligence is not something that is necessarily part of the public discourse or even prioritized or even rewarded. Being called sensitive was a negative thing. And it actually backfired against him in school and other areas. So that's part of the story. But he loved science, Arduino, fun facts, the History Channel. I don't know if any, vintage millennials remember the nature store in the malls in the 90s. He loved that and all the fun, anything that had to do with nature. So he wanted to be a pilot. He was funny. He was so funny. He gave the absolute best bear hugs and made really good mac and cheese and iced coffee. And I never drink iced coffee, but I would drink his because it was actually pretty good. And unfortunately, in his early teen years, he started to, for whatever reason, my belief is related to bullying, but I don't know that for a fact. He started to, I guess, test drugs like marijuana and things like that with his peers at school. And that escalated into addiction. So he struggled with addiction as a teenager. And this is again in the late 90s, early 2000s, when there was all this talk about sending kids off to these outdoor school camps, which was what the therapists and psychologists and everybody asked us to do. We fought that for some time. And instead, my parents, with the professional's advice, put him on medication for ADHD. And eventually things got a little bit difficult. So he did have to go to an outdoor school camp, which was and is a horrible way to support these people in need. But we know that in hindsight, because at the time, all the professionals were saying, no, this is the best route. This is absolutely going to help him. So he struggled with addiction for about 20 years, in and out of rehab. We supported him as a family. We, over the years, learned that addiction is a systemic thing. It's a family system thing. It's not an individual failure. It is not a moral failure. And it is not something that the person in active addiction should navigate on their own. So unfortunately, that took us a very long time to learn. And especially because there was no public discourse about addiction that was supportive. It was always shrouded in shame It was always shrouded in, you don't talk about these things. I remember my dad saying, we don't air our dirty laundry, which is a horrible thing to say because the moment you step out of your home, you have to pretend that everything's okay.
Yeah.
And we go to holidays with family, friends, and everybody's pretending, and how's your brother? And how's this? How's that? And you just have to fake a smile and say, everything's great. Everything's fine.
Even with your larger family, your extended family?
Yes, yes. It was to that degree. So at the time we lived in Portland, Oregon, in the suburbs, actually. My brother was away. He was in Utah. And while my brother was away, they didn't want an attempt to protect my family from what was happening. And to be honest, I would imagine my parents were not sure how to deal with this themselves. And they struggled with feeling like they failed in some way. And these are my words, not theirs. So I would imagine that's how they felt, because I remember he was there for almost 2 years. And after he left, I remember coming home and it was always dark, windows closed, them like zombied out by the TV because they just couldn't believe. I'm sure they dealt with depression, even though that's not anything we've ever talked about. But it was a very hard time. And my family, my grandparents didn't know. And it was always like, oh, he's at a summer camp. Oh, he's in school. He's at a friend's house. But then after a year of this, my grandparents said, if you don't tell me where he is, I'm going over there. I'm flying. They were all the way across the country in Florida. So they said, we're flying over there if you're not telling me the truth, what's going on. And then we finally told them and they said, that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's really hard. And whenever things like this happen, it's better to carry them together. Even though we don't know what to do, it's better to not do this on your own. So it was actually a good thing in the end.
Oh, good. So you were able to get their support throughout that time as well. Did you feel free to then not have to put on a mask when you walked outside the house?
So I want to highlight that this happened over years. This wasn't like one moment where there was a clear before and after. We slowly dripped the information to our family and they took their time in understanding and processing. And everybody's like, well, why don't you just do this? Kind of superficial solutions that would make sense if they didn't understand the depths to which we were dealing with this. And again, I was a teenager myself. So there's a lot that I don't know just simply because my parents tried to shield me from so much of what was going on in the background. So I'll preface it with that. And after college, I moved to Florida. My family moved to Florida to be closer to the rest of my relatives. That's where I'm currently at. And we hoped that here it would be better, not knowing that Florida has some of the highest activity rates of addiction than other states. And we didn't know that at the time. He went in and out of rehab here. And at this point in our lives, our families were informed and they understood. And so it was helpful to be able to not have to hide so much, because the hiding and the shame doesn't make things go away. It makes them fester and become more dangerous and harmful. And it resurfaces in other ways. So we were supported by our family. There were actually a lot more moments of stability. My brother, again, he was in and out of rehab, and we really had some beautiful moments with our family. But that's the reality of loving somebody who's experiencing addiction. It's a very layered experience. I was always his keeper. I felt responsible for his joy and his peace. He brought me a lot of peace. And I learned to value the moments that felt stable a lot more, understanding that the next day it could be something completely different. I never, ever, ever blamed him. I think that's what shocked me in speaking with other siblings, that they were so angry. And that's very valid too. They were very angry with their siblings. But I saw how hard he fought. And I saw how much he loved our family and how much he tried for us. I wish he would have maybe tried as hard for himself, because I know that he struggled maybe in loving himself. But my relationship with him was more of just understanding my capacity to go from judgment of you are doing this and it's hurting us to, wow, you really are struggling with this. I'm so sorry. And how can we help you? Understanding that a moment of relapse doesn't mean everything's over. It just means this person needs to be supported extra during this time. So expanding our capacity to have compassion for him, support him, and not judge every single thing that didn't go our way as a bad thing. It was just more, hey, this is the reality that we're dealing with. It's as if somebody has a chronic illness and they have a flare-up, if you will. So these were the flare-ups. And you don't judge a person because of a flare-up.
Right. I think sometimes if losing someone to a stigmatized loss, but also in that process, the stigma of the mental health or the substance use, or even certain medical conditions that are stigmatized, I think it's really hard for a lot of people to see past those disorders or those diagnoses and understand who the person is. And as his sister, I can hear you see that. What else would you like us to know about him beyond his illness?
He's not his endpoint. His endpoint does not define his life.
Yeah.
Addiction played a huge role. I feel like I have to qualify so much of who he was and how he got there. At the end of the day, if I were to make a pie chart to give somebody a visual, addiction would be a tiny slice of who he was. It's something he struggled with, but the person is what I miss. And I'm able to separate the behavior of addiction from who he was. And who he was, honestly, if there were more people like him, this world would be a better place. He was kind. He really understood the meaning of life, the true meaning of life. And he used to have this phrase saying called LLPs, life's little pleasures. He would say that on a sunny day. He would love riding his bike. We currently, like I said, live in South Florida, so there's many beautiful sunny days. And if I would talk to him about something and he would say, that's cool, I'm listening, but can we go walk outside or can we go ride our bikes outside? And you can tell me everything, but let's just do it outside or go to the beach. We would ride to the beach and talk about whatever it was. I trusted him with my life. I trusted him more than a lot of my other relatives. In fact, when he met my current husband and I asked my brother, what's your opinion on him? Because my brother was sensitive, he was able to read people beyond the representative that we show up to people, beyond the initial impression. And he said, this is a good person. I like him. And I said, great. My husband learned about my brother's addiction and actually supported our family through so many things and never, not once, not ever judged my brother. And I think that's ultimately why he's my husband, because I realized this person sees the human being that he is, the wonderful, funny, he's so funny human being that he is. He brought so much lightness to our lives that I think that's one of the things I miss most. Life feels incredibly heavy. And there's a lightness that Joseph brought to our lives that I haven't experienced since his passing. And I'm getting emotional saying this because it's one of the things I miss most. He carried so much heaviness and yet he gave people so much lightness. I wish for people to remember him as a light, as somebody that brought joy, who gave incredible hugs, who understood the real meaning of life. And sometimes that can feel like a burden. And I think it was a double-edged sword ultimately.
I wonder if that's why your podcast is named Grief and Light.
Part of it. I feel like I still am finding ways to define why Grief and Light is the name of the podcast. The reason it's because when he passed, people would ask me how he died. And I could not say he passed from fentanyl poisoning. The words would not come out of my mouth because I was in such a tender space and I didn't have the words or the strength to speak his name and fentanyl in the same sentence and be on the receiving end of so much judgment from people who didn't and do not understand. So I would say we still haven't received the report. We don't know. It was sudden, probably a heart attack. And I would say some things like that. And then about 2.5 years later, it dawned on me that so much of the reason why he struggled with addiction was because of the shame, was because of our inability to speak the truth out loud, was because we also carried that shame. And in doing so, it kept his ability to recover in the dark. And I said, no, I refuse to let shame be the thing that hides our reality after his death. And so I said, I have to start shining a light on these things. I have to speak the truth. As pretty or ugly or whatever it is the truth. And I decided to one day say, you know what, I'm going to say this. And what people think is none of my business. What people think is the lens through which they view life. My responsibility is to share my truth, his truth, and the fullness of the story. Also, when we were deciding on the headstone for his plots, my mom had this phrase. She thought of this phrase that is now engraved on there. And we speak Spanish. We're from Puerto Rico. So I'll say it in Spanish and then I'll translate it. And it's Que la luz divina siempre alumbre tu camino. May the divine light always illuminate your path or guide you, if you will. So the theme of light, the theme of illuminating, the theme of shining a light in the darkness has been there since the beginning. Though grief obviously felt very dark and heavy, and it shows you the contrast in life. So I feel like shining a light on the reality of loss to addiction, on the reality of living life after loss, on the reality of navigating grief felt very true to what I was experiencing. And so that's one of the reasons why it's called a light.
You were talking about your husband and your brother's approval of him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I recently just re-listened to that episode with you and your husband. I related a lot to that. I think that my husband would too if he listened to the episode. So thank you for that. But it was very clear his personality, Joseph's personality, and you both acknowledging that and the impact. It was probably one of my favorite episodes that you've done. But they're all great.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. But there is, and I've talked about this on other episodes, and I'm sure in your work you've come across it, the dual process model of grief by Stu and about living and loss orientation and restoration orientation. And it sounds like you're finding that balance between grief and loss pretty well.
And I love that you said finding, because it's still an ongoing thing.
Absolutely. Grief is with us forever. Yeah.
And thank you for bringing that up, because I'm curious by nature. And so when I don't understand something, I delve both feet in to try to figure it out. I think the model that we're most familiar with is the 5 stages of grief. That's the one that I obviously found. And I said, okay, which stage am I on? And am I angry? I don't feel angry, but I'm sad. Okay. And it just didn't quite resonate. And in understanding grief, that's when I found all the other models. And I was like, wait, there's like a ton more. This isn't the only one. There's like many more.
It's actually not a grief model for people that have lost a loved one. So teaching a grief counseling class right now. And I think everyone in that class can recite why that is not. Yes.
Thank you for the class, because it's much needed. Absolutely. And for the record, that was by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she never intended it for it to be on grief and life after death. It was always on death and dying to explain the process ultimately of acceptance. And so I went viral before going viral was a thing, and somehow it stuck because people like tidy linear processes. Unfortunately, I think it has backfired more than it has been helpful. It gives people that initial kind of language to understand grief. So I can definitely honor that. And I honor her work as a pioneer in the space, especially in the 60s, I think it was.
Yes, it does have its place in that it helped us normalize talking about death and dying and loss, for sure. That all aside, are there other theories that have stuck with you?
Absolutely. The continued bonds theory. That shifted how I navigated grief. Once I learned that there could be a connection beyond death. Death ends a life, but not a relationship. It doesn't have to end a relationship. It reframed how I saw it. And I said, okay, he's not physically here. I can't talk to him. But there are things that are happening that make me feel very close to him. And they almost feel like a new language. If I look at this as a new language that I need to learn, then instead of seeing these things as why did this happen, instead of questioning and looking backwards, I can start putting the pieces together forward. And that's what happened. And so in practicing continued bonds, I think that really, really helped me navigate my loss.
Yeah. I've been trading with Bob Niemeyer, and it's the meaning reconstruction and grief therapy.
Yeah.
And there's a continuing bonds aspect to that. But what you just said fits well into how we look back and understand our lives and then move forward and live with this loss. We're like restoring our lives to make it work. Are there things you would like us to know about losing Joseph?
When you lose your only sibling, and sibling loss is already layered than other losses because your birth order impacts or can impact how you grieve. An older sibling sees a younger sibling as not their child, but someone that they're responsible for in some way, shape, or form, or at least your example is a model to this person. So there's always that awareness that whatever you do will impact this other younger person. When you are a middle child, I've heard that they feel more like a peer, like a sidekick, like he or she or they were my buddies and we did everything together. When it's a younger person who loses their older sibling, it's like you lose a parent figure or a role model or somebody who you looked up to. So these are very general terms. So I don't want to put blanket statements, but I'm just giving a framework for how different it could already be. Twins losing their twins or triplets losing a sibling. That also has its added layers.
Absolutely.
And so losing Joseph, who was my only sibling, made me question, am I still a sister if my brother is dead? And I struggled with that for a long time because I said, I feel like his sister. I still want to be his sister. But if somebody asks me, where's your brother? He's not, I don't have one right now. So I struggled for some years to redefine that. And this moment that I'm going to talk about in a second was the turning point for me. In 2020, early 2020, around I think it was February. So around the time that you lost Tony.
Thank you.
So sorry. So I offered a new position. I was working in real estate. I was offered a new position and I was introduced to a new team. One of the people that worked there said, well, now that you're an only sibling, and then she continued to talk, but everything faded. I could not hear anything after that because I said, what did she just say? That felt like a punch to the gut because somebody who barely knew me, who just learned about who I am because I had just met her and the fact that my brother had passed a few months prior, immediately said, oh, well, now you're an only sibling. It's the logical thing. A stranger, for all intents and purposes, felt completely okay redefining my entire sense of identity in that statement. So the shock, I had to excuse myself to go to the restroom. I was crying, could not function the rest of the day because it really shook me. It shook the foundation beneath me. It almost felt like this person understands something about my own life that I don't at this point. And it's very disorienting. And I said, wow, I'm losing a grip on my own reality, is what it felt like. So I went home. I tried to process that. I cried. I did journaling, all the things. And then I got angry. And I said, no, that person cannot define me. Nobody can define me. I am still his sister. And that's why a very painful moment ended up being a turning point of me putting both feet down and saying, no, I am and continue to be and will always be his sister. When people ask me, I will always say, I am Joseph's sister. I have a sibling. I have one brother. He's not physically here, but it still defines me as his sister.
Which is, I'm so glad that you came to that place because when you were talking about like your very first memory is of learning you're going to be, that you are a sister. My father also, who is a sibling loss survivor, I've said that many times, he said something similar to me at some point after Tony died. He was like, now that you're an only child. And I was like, Dad, I'm not. So we can't let other people define us. I wonder if there are siblings out there that would say that. And I haven't met any yet that would.
I have not either, but I always, I guess at the end of the day, if that's a helpful thought to you, if you've lost a sibling and somehow that feels good in your stomach, in your knowing place in your body, in your heart and mind, there's nothing wrong with that. It didn't feel good in mine. And it doesn't feel like who I am. It doesn't feel aligned with who I know myself to be and the role that I know I still embody. But if that's helpful to you, by all means, that's fine. We're not saying that's necessarily anything bad or good. It just is.
That's a great observation and insight. I was asking because I have yet to meet them. It would be interesting to understand what is helpful about that. If it's the same. It's interesting that you talked about birth order in that way, because I was having this reaction when you said that. My brother was 22 months older, and he felt more like a peer, I guess, in a lot of ways. I did look up to him. But everyone that met us after a certain point thought I was older. So it was different. I didn't have that same worldview that you did, or that you thought a younger sibling would have.
And that's part of why this experience is so layered and why I preface it with these are not blanket statements because, for example, the vast majority of siblings with whom I've spoken that lost a sibling to substance-related causes, they're angry. And that's fair. It was very shocking to me at first because I understood deeply my brother was not doing this to me. But that's not what I've encountered in conversations with other siblings. They are angry. They said, you hurt our family, you hurt our mom, you hurt me, you hurt your kid, you hurt fill in the blank. And that's when I realized, wow, we really do have to honor that everybody experiences things so differently. And just because I experienced sibling loss this way doesn't mean it doesn't make me an expert in sibling loss at all. It makes me an expert in my sibling loss, but I cannot speak with a blanket statement about this experience because that's just factually incorrect.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's a tendency for people to experience something and want to say that we understand it fully. And sibling relationships are complicated. So even if we're just talking about sibling loss survivors and how all of the grief is different, all of the circumstances are different, we can't forget that family dynamics and family relationships and structures are all different and complicated.
I've also met siblings who were estranged and siblings who were abusive with the siblings, and they're still grieving the loss of their sibling who was sometimes even physically abusive to them. Siblinghood doesn't look the same to everybody. There's also dynamics with half siblings. And when you get to the nitty gritty and you study each section, you realize why sibling loss is so layered and complex and nuanced to understand, and why it's so misunderstood in the bizarre hierarchy that we've somehow accepted as this is the worst loss versus losses that don't deserve support. Sibling grief tends to be at the bottom. And yet, earlier this year, I did an event with Reimagine on sibling loss, and it got the highest amount of registrations ever. So I said, interesting, because it's the one that they haven't spoken about. And yet there is a desire to speak about this and a desire for siblings to validate their own experience. I think we don't often feel like we can validate our own experience. It's worthy because that's the message that we receive. It's, Dr. Dean, how's your mom? How's everybody else but you?
Exactly.
That experience over and over again makes you think, maybe my grief isn't really that important. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I should be over it by now. And I don't know about you, but I started to internalize that. And then I got angry. And again, I love anger in this sense because it lets me know where I feel something is unjust. And every time I feel angry now, I say, okay, where's a sense of justice in this area that feels like it has been violated? So I think if I'm angry that my grief is not being validated, maybe there's something here. And that's when, these conversations started to emerge about sibling loss. So for whatever it's worth, if you're a sibling who is estranged or had a very complex relationship with your sibling, and you may not understand why you're grieving them the way you are right now, that is perfectly normal. That's perfectly valid. We are more than certain dynamics and interactions. And sometimes we even grieve the opportunity or the wish to have the opportunity to have fixed it prior to their death. And death puts a final endpoint in that sometimes, and that could have its own grief.
For sure. There's this concept called unfinished business and grief. When that's there, working through that becomes a little bit more challenging. And that is some of the work we do in grief counseling and grief therapy is how do you work with that unfinished business. But I think it's also important to highlight, because we've talked about continuing bonds, that not all continuing bonds are healthy. And just like all relationships are not healthy, not all of those continuing bonds are healthy. And so it's okay to not have that bond. If it was an unhealthy relationship, it doesn't mean that you can't work through that unfinished business.
Thank you for that point. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome. There was someone I interviewed, Brandy, and she was an estranged twin. And so we did talk about this idea of how difficult it can be to grieve someone that you weren't necessarily talking to. So to your earlier point, siblinghood is all different. This loss is all different. I think what becomes very salient is the one common thread is that it is a lifelong loss, regardless of how young or old you were when you lost your sibling.
And Lynn Shattuck, there's a quote by her that really resonated, and it's sibling loss is the loss of a lifetime because you lose your past, present, and future. So my brother and I were raised in Puerto Rico in our childhood. Then we moved to Portland, Oregon, surrounding areas, and then to Florida. He was that continuous thread, and the one that I could say, hey, you remember when this happened? And he knows exactly what I'm talking about without me having to explain. I was raised here and over here, and I don't have to explain myself. He just got it. We had our own sibling language, our own inside jokes. One of those things that you just talk to each other with a stare.
Yes.
When something happened, and he knows exactly what that meant. And I missed that.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of people have told me about that look, right? I was just at a family funeral a couple weeks ago, and there was something that happened, and I was like, if he was here, we'd be giving each other this look right now. He wasn't.
And that's
Are there things you do want to say about changes in the family or structure that have resulted, or other secondary losses from grief?
So many. I honestly I've had episodes about this because there's just one thing after another. And every time I think I discover, oh, these are all the changes. No, there's always something else. One thing that I guess I just feel like sharing it in this conversation is I had given myself this arbitrary timeline milestone, I guess you could call it, after my brother died. And I said, if we can survive until the 5th year of his 5th anniversary, I think we're going to be okay. And for 5 years, I was in this collecting data mode, is what I call it. Collecting data that we could survive this, collecting data that everything was going to be okay. And we did. And actually, I look back on pictures and I kind of giggle to myself because I'm like, oh my gosh, I was forcing joy so much here. It was so important for me to be like, Mom, smile in this picture because I need to know that you could still smile, And so I see the progression of me just trying to prove that things were going to be okay. So something really weird happened last anniversary, actually 2 anniversaries ago, because it's been 6 months in this September, since his passing. 6 months, 6 years. What is grief time? So at the 5th anniversary of his passing, I felt an incredibly strange sense of very disoriented, very disconnected, very confused because I said, I reached the milestone. Now what? And unbeknownst to me, that milestone provided a foundation for me to stand on in terms of whenever things feel shaky, I have to get to that 5th one. I have to get to that 5th one. So when I got to the 5th one, I was like, oh my gosh, I never made a plan for the 6th one or the 7th or the 8th. So it felt like those movies where there's an astronaut that somehow gets ejected and he's off into space, like floating, very disoriented. It felt very much like that. And I said, what now? And so I'm finding myself in years 5 and 6 back at square one with my own grief. And so how does this relate to the family? In the first 5 years, I handled my parents so carefully, not wanting to talk about certain things because I was like, oh my God, I need to make sure that they're going to be okay. I need to make sure that I don't show any anger towards them. I need to make sure that I'm incredibly supportive and I'm not the cause for their pain. Years 5 and 6, all of a sudden I'm feeling the sense of anger and resentment and all the things I kept to myself over my whole life, but especially over the past 5 years are resurfacing. So now that I feel like, okay, we've proven by my measures, my very arbitrary measures that we're okay. We've proven that much. Now I'm feeling some type of way about certain things that happened. And I'm angry, if I'm very honest. I feel, again, that sense of injustice. So the family dynamics have changed in that I am now able to allow myself to see the parts that were not so pretty, the parts that felt unfair, the parts that felt too fragile to talk about initially. So now I'm back at square one, using the tools that I've gained about navigating grief and being honest and integrating and all the things to deal with my own grief and also communicate, hey, this was wrong or this was hurtful in a different context, and understanding that you can grieve somebody and you can also feel all these other things that come along with it.
Thank you for that. And I think you just gave voice to something I was trying to navigate in my own life, because those of you that listen to this podcast or have been on it or been on Instagram know that I haven't been active. Because as I hit that 5th year, I was like, I don't know what's happening. I just felt so overwhelmed by it. I think you just shed light on why this last year and a half has been really hard. And I felt really stuck. But we're back.
The 5th year was honestly one of the hardest.
Yeah.
I don't want to scare people either because, again, with time, you also grow around your grief and you're better able to understand and handle. So it's not like it doesn't feel like 1st or 2nd year grief. And people who have been past those two will understand. It's different.
Yes.
And also, there is a strange heaviness that I think is what you're referring to that feels a little unexpected. It catches you off guard.
Yeah, for sure. So where are you today in your grief?
Today in my grief, I am honoring what's showing up, not judging it. I'm not shoulding on myself. I should be feeling this way or I should be in this. There's nothing. I'm a lot gentler. I honor what shows up and I allow it to change me. And like I said, I don't see my feelings as I shouldn't be feeling this. If I'm angry, okay, you're angry. What's underneath that? If you are emotional, like I was listening to your podcast this morning and I got emotional because I said, A, thank you for these stories, truly. B, I wish I had this in 2019.
Me too. Well, 6 months after, but
I wish I'd heard this. It would have made me not feel so alone. In my grief now, as a sister, I have felt this responsibility to carry his name forward. I'll also mention that I don't have kids. He never had kids. So there's also a layer of grief where my parents won't be grandparents. My family tree branch dies with me, and that's it. And so talking about future legacy, life, what the point of life is, I've had to redefine my identity, my sense of purpose, what life really means to me, what my contribution in life is, what I want to do with the rest of my days, all of these things as a result of this loss. I have this weird, I guess it's like a fantasy, like a weird thing that I'm like, I wish he had a kid that I don't know about. That I want this one to knock on my door and be like, your brother was my dad. And I would just welcome this being into my life. And probably not going to happen, but it's that idea of grieving the lack of continuity and what that means for me, my family, and my purpose. So it's something I'm still navigating. And yeah, it's something new every day.
Yeah. It sounds like your journey through these last 6 years as you're redefining meaning and purpose, you've had the big M meanings, right? The work that you're doing around grief and loss, switching. Are you still working in real estate or?
I still have my license, but I'm not active.
Yeah. So you've shifted a little bit to focusing more on grief coaching and speaking and everything. And so those feel like the big meaning and the big purpose, but the little M meaning. And I think of every day, like how do we find those smaller ways of making meaning? And I loved your brother's term, that LOP. You've really carried that forward with you.
Thank you.
So
and thank you for saying that because it's so true. I was just having this conversation with my husband and I said, we think joy is this firework events, highlight reels that we need to chase after all the time and these big milestones. I've discovered, thanks to my brother and the LLPs, thank you for saying that, that joy is a slow burning candle. That little candle that's not shining super bright, but it's there. Maybe it's scented and it just makes the room smell lovely. And it brings a new dimension to the space. And you can tap into it whenever you want. Yeah, absolutely. The little M meaning is something I focus on quite a bit.
That's fantastic. I don't know if you've heard the book by Stephen Petro, The Joy You Make.
No, but I will.
So Stephen was on our pod like a couple of years ago, and he spoke about his loss of his sister through medical aid and dying. But after that, he wrote a book called The Joy You Make. And it's about joy is not happiness and how do we find joy, make joy in our lives. So I think you'd love it.
I absolutely would. And I'm going to listen to that episode right after.
Yeah.
And also, I spoke with Annie Sclaver-Orenstein. She's the author of Always a Sibling.
We keep emailing back and forth, and I hope to have her on here soon.
Yes, I hope you do, because she has a chapter in her book, which I highly recommend. It's oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name, but how joy can feel terrifying and scary and risky after loss, especially in deep sorrow and bereavement and grief. Joy feels like it's taking you away from your person, or it can feel like that. It could feel like you'll never feel joy again. It can feel like it's something you resent. And at the end of the day, I want to open the door for those, especially newly bereaved, to the possibility of joy. You don't have to welcome it right away. You don't have to even go out of your way to feel it. Allow yourself to feel whatever. And also with time, those everyday joys start to surface. And you will feel them more and more.
And it's surprising when you look back and that you're experiencing it again, because I don't know if this was your experience, but you don't feel like it's ever going to happen, as you said. And then when you do, you look back and you're like, I've been experiencing joy. Yeah. Have you been able to use the continuing bond that you have with Joseph to find joy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I did a podcast episode with Dr. Joshua Black of Grief Dreams podcast, because one of the things that I did without knowing is that every time I have very vivid dreams, and there were times when I would dream about my brother. And every time I would dream about him, when I woke up, as soon as I woke up, I would take the notes section on my phone and write what the dream was about. In a 5-year span, I've had over 200 dreams with my brother. Most of those are just dreams. Some of them, like a handful of them, have felt like visitations. That is one way that I continued bonds. I know that's not something a lot of people experience and would like to. Like my mother would love to dream with him. She doesn't. What I learned from Dr. Joshua Black is that you can increase your dream recall rate by writing down your dreams. And I thought that was something that was interesting because it's something I did naturally. And also, a lot of people say, ask for a sign. And I remember hearing that and I almost got angry. I said, what do you mean ask for a sign? A sign of what? Right. And also I opened the door and I said, surprise me with something that I would know is you. And it's happened so many times. Initially, I questioned it. Now I just welcome it as, again, our new language, our new inside jokes, if you will.
Yeah.
Our new stares across the room. I know that was you. And if it feels like a point of connection, if it feels like love, or it even reminds you of them, how does this happen even matter that much? Like at the end of the day, it's, hey, this reminded me of him. This felt like something he would have said. And then there are experiences that give you chills, that make you pause and you open your eyes and you say, wow, I think that really was you. Your energy or something that I can't quite put my finger on, but it's related to you. So continued bonds has been incredibly helpful to me. Like you mentioned earlier, I'm fully aware that there's a lot of people that it's not helpful for, especially if the relationship was abusive or if the person has an avoidant attachment style. But it has been helpful to me.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Are there other things that you want to say about grief or loss or sibling loss we didn't cover?
A lot of it I cover on my podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm always finding new things to say. But today I feel like saying grief is a normal human response to loss and life-altering change.
Yes.
Grief is not just sadness. Sadness, sure, it's a big part of grief. It's sorrow, bereavement, but they are not the same thing as grief. Grief is the overarching experience that follows a loss. Grieving is how we relate to that experience. So while everybody is going to experience grief, grieving is very individual.
Yes.
And that dynamic with our grief changes over time. It evolves. And in my opinion, if and when you lean in and you realize that grief, or at least I did, is this thing that is your new roommate and it has moved into your house, into your space, and you're better off trying to understand it, lean in, welcome it. It can become a teacher. It could become one of the most powerful, in my opinion, one of the most powerful teachers one can have, to the point that today I feel like grief work is life-affirming work. And it has helped me live a fuller life because I leaned into it. So that's an invitation I would never tell anybody what to do. It's more of an invitation to open the door and not try to get rid of it as much or fix. There is no fixing. As much as just lean in, get curious, and see the ways in which it could help you move forward.
That is beautiful, perfect advice. I couldn't have said any better. So thank you. Are there favorite memories that you would like to share with us of you and Joseph?
Like I said, we love riding. Bike rides to the beach will always be some of my favorites. This one memory comes to mind. Two memories, actually. So our favorite movie was The Lion King, and we were kids. The original one, guys. And we used to have Disney PJs that were way too big. They were oversized. And that opening song, I think it's the Circle of Life song. I'm not going to sing it, but everybody knows the Circle of Life song.
I will not sing it either.
The words that they say in another language at the beginning sounded to us like, and I'm going to say it in Spanish again, I'll translate it. But it sounded to us like, en pijama a las 5 de la mañana. So that means in PJs at 5 o'clock in the morning. That's what we understood the song said. So I remember this one memory of us in our Disney PJs, early morning. We're watching the movie again. I think it was like after Christmas because we just had rollerblades. So we put our rollerblades inside the house, put the movie on in our PJs, and we're starting singing like in our PJs at 5 o'clock in the morning in the tone of the song, right? And it was just pure happiness. Life was perfect in that moment. And a second one I'll share is we went on a family vacation to Yosemite National Park. I remember we went camping there overnight. And there's these tents. I thought camping was going to be in a cabin, but it was like in a tent. And they say, don't leave food because there's bears and all these things. I was like, this little piece of cloth around us is supposed to if this is wild. So at night, we heard, the bears. We heard the rustling. We heard them banging on the trash cans and all these things. And I was terrified. And it was when my brother was going through puberty. So it was like his voice was changing. And he had that deeper voice that cracked a little bit. And he's like, do you hear that? And I was like, be be quiet. They can hear me telling him to be quiet because his voice was projecting so much. And I was like, you're going to get us killed by bears. Like, quiet. And he could not stop laughing. And I'm terrified. And we're in this cabin in the middle of Yosemite Park. And we always talked about that because I was like, you could have gotten us killed by bears just by talking because we couldn't whisper at that time. So those are two fun memories that come up today.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing about your grief. And Joe's, I feel like I know him a little bit better.
Thank you. And thank you for the space to talk about him. And thank you for the work you do and for your podcast. Truly.
Same to you. Your work is magical and award-winning. So congratulations on that as well.
Thank you so much. Unexpected. Thank you.
Yeah. And our listeners should go check that out.
Yeah.
So I will put all of your links in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening. Our theme song was written by Joe Millwood and Brian Dean and was performed by Joe Millwood. If you would like more information on The Broken Pack, go to our website, thebrokenpack.com. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter, Wild Grief, to learn about opportunities and receive exclusive information and grieving tips for subscribers. Information on that, our social media, and on our guests can be found in the show notes wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. Thanks again.
You're second guessing, oh, you never know, you just never know.